An educational video hosted by Charlie Sheen revealing, is there life on Mars?
And then they just asked David Bowie.
Yes.
Gentlemen, let's broaden our minds.
Are they in the proper approach pattern for today?
Negative.
All weapons! Now! Charge the lightning field.
All right, Skip, I heard you want to hear about them there aliens. Is that right?
That is true. I would like to know who's probing me anally. This is something that I've been wrestling with.
Look in the mirror.
Oh man, if I do this to myself in my sleep, there's a serious problem.
Or a serious solution.
I
No, the Dog Star Sirius. That's what I meant by that.
was thinking more of like that James Wan movie.
Oh, Malevolent?
Malevolent, yeah.
But instead of a face in the back of your head, it's...
It's just cramming shit up her ass the whole time.
You know what? I'd watch that. So, we are still continuing our look into the skies and into the ether for more interesting stories of what is out there and perhaps coming into here. Skip, the history, quote unquote, of alien abduction is varied and colorful and could theoretically go back hundreds of years.
Mm-hmm.
But that conversation about the similarities between fairies, old hags, trickster entities, hypnagogia, sleep paralysis, and incubus-succubus encounters, that is for a different day and a different pod.
Absolutely. Last time, we did talk about how the Nuremberg UFO sighting was a thing, and that was, 500 years ago?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But not in the other old wives' tale folklore stuff, but straight up UFOs fighting each other in the sky.
Or maybe they're Vimanas.
They weren't sundogs, I'll tell you that right now.
In our modern view, the layman might point to, in your mind, what do you think of as like the first alien encounters or alien abductions particular? What kind of jumps to mind?
The Benny and Barney Hill cases are probably the most famous, the most immediate that are
that was
well
September
documented.
19th, 1961.
Right.
I think other ones that kind of come to people's mind are Travis Walton. That was 1975, or even Whitley Strieber's Communion that came out in 1987 for stories that happened obviously before that. But none of these are considered the earliest modern abduction, with many of the hallmarks of the abduction phenomenon years before such accounts were recounted, let alone popularized in culture. No, this is the story of a Brazilian farmer who reported an abduction back in October 15th, 1957. This is the story of Antônio Vias Boas.
Very cool. Brazilians have their own UFO history. They deal with a lot of unidentified submerged objects as well as UFO encounters. They are rich with history with UFOs.
So before he was abducted, just to lay out a little bit of the scene, this was a young 23-year-old man. He was living on his family's farm, and he and his brother, they would work at night, try and beat the heat. So they would try to do their yard work during the evening. And on October 5th was the first weirdness that happened in 1957. Boas said that he spotted a bright light in the sky as he opened his window for some air after sleeping. He woke up with the same light moving towards him as he looked at it. Boas was scared and showed his brother, who looked in awe as the bright light danced through the shutters before leaving on their farm. Now, like I said, this is, about 9-10 days before the actual abduction happened, which is what we will get into now. Mm-hmm. Boas was working at 10 p.m. His brother and he were tilling out in the fields, and they saw a bright light 300 feet above their heads, they said. He left his brother to check it out, and when he got close, it zoomed back and forth, and as soon as he got close, no less than 20 times, he gave up, eventually, trying to get close to this weird light, and it disappeared. The next night, Boas was working alone, and then a reddish light came right up on top of him. Quote, so quickly that it was on top of me before I could make up my mind what to do. The light was intense, so intense that he couldn't see his own tractor lights in the dead of night. The craft was a large, elongated egg shape with 3 legs that extended beneath it. Now, Boas said that he was on his tractor and tried to get away on his tractor from this craft, but then the lights died, the engine just died. It wouldn't go.
The tractor died?
You get a lot of reports of automotives, when craft come,
Right.
it kills all electronics.
That's an internal combustion engine, so that's odd.
Hey, man, they don't work with our physics, man.
Okay, all right.
I don't know. I can't explain it. So the craft then kind of settled down and began to land. Like I said, Boas ran to his tractor in terror. When he reached it, the tractor and the lights died. So he tried making his escape to the other side and running towards a house when his arm was grabbed by what he said was a small figure. Said it only reached about his shoulder height, in strange clothes, which he violently shoved away. 3 more small figures surrounded him and lifted him off the ground by the arms. Now, Boas described these as typical grays that are kind of common in other abductions. They had gray suits with large rounded eyeglasses, 3 silvery tubes protruding out of their heads, small figures about 1.5 meters tall with shoes. And they said they communicated with strange sounds not producible by humans, kind of like animal grunts. So I kind of think of maybe like Tim the Toolman Taylor aliens.
Not producible by humans. Sure, yes. No human could do that.
Yeah. They had very tight-fitting siren suits made of soft, thick, unevenly striped gray material. The garment reached right up to their necks, where it was joined to a kind of helmet made out of gray material that looked stiffer and was strengthened back at the nose level. Their helmets hide everything except their eyes, which were protected by 2 round glasses like lenses in ordinary glasses. Through them, the men looked at me. He called them men, and their eyes seemed to be much smaller than ours, though I believe that maybe they affected the lenses. All of them had light-colored eyes that looked blue to me, but this I cannot vouch for. Above their eyes, those helmets looked so tall that they corresponded to what the double of size of a normal man's head should be. Probably there was something else hidden under those helmets, placed on top of their heads, but nothing could be seen from the outside. Right on top, from the middle of their head, there sprouted 3 round silvery metal tubes. I can't tell whether they were made of metal or rubber, which were a little narrower than a common garden hose. The tubes, which were placed one in the middle and one on each side of the head, were smooth and bent backward and downward toward the back. There they fitted into their clothes. How I cannot say, but one went down their center, where their backbone is, and the other 2 on each side fitted under the shoulders about 4 inches from their armpits, nearly at their sides where the back begins. I didn't notice anything at all, no hump or lump to show where the tubes attached, nor any box or contrivance hidden under their clothes.
That just sounds like a tiny Bane.
I want you to come with me.
No, the comic book version with the venom and everything.
Oh, why can't it be this made from space? Their sleeves were narrow and tight-fitted to the wrists, where they followed by thick 5-fingered gloves of the same color that must have somewhat hindered their movements. As to this, I noticed that the men weren't able to double their fingers all together, so as to touch the palms of their hands with the tips of their fingers. The difficulty did not prevent them from catching and holding me firmly, nor from deftly manipulating the rubber tubes for extracting my blood.
Oh.
Those overalls must have been a kind of uniform, for all the members of the crew wore a red badge the size of a pineapple slice on their chest. Sometimes it reflected a shiny light. Not a light of its own, but a reflection such as those given by the rear lights of a car, when another car lights it up from behind. From the center badge there came a strip of silvery metal, or it might have been flattened metal, which joined onto a broad, tight-fitting collapsus belt, the color of which I can't remember. He remembers so much else, but he can't remember that.
Yeah, it's so specific. And then...
No pocket could be seen anywhere. I don't know where they're going to put their pokes and prodding instruments. And I don't remember seeing any buttons either. The trousers were also tight-fitting over the buttocks. Yes, they were. Thighs and legs. As there was not a wrinkle or crease to be seen, there was no visible hem between the trousers and shoes, which were actually a continuation of the former, being part of the self-same garment. The soles of the shoes, which were different from ours, they were thick, about 2 or 3 inches, and a little turned up, or arched up in front, so that the tips looked like those describing in fairy tales of old, though the general appearance was that of a common tennis shoe. Okay.
Okay. I'm getting some Sandown Clown vibes here.
Well, just wait.
Oh boy!
From what I saw later, they must have fitted loosely, for they were larger than the feet they covered. In spite of this, the men's gait was free and easy, and their movements were swift indeed. Perhaps the closed siren suit they wore did interfere slightly with their movements because they kept walking very stiffly. Like I said, they're all about 1.5 to 1.6 meters tall, in shoes, mind you. Perhaps a little shorter because of those helmets, except for one of them, the one who had caught hold of me out there. This one did not even reach my chin. All seemed strong, but not so strong that had I fought with one of them at any time, I should have been afraid of losing. I believe that in a free-for-all fight, I could face any single one of them on an equal base. Yeah, it's Alien Fight Club. That's what he's dreaming of.
Hell yeah.
All right, enough with their uniforms. It's quite a bit.
No, let's throw down.
At this point, while resisting as best he could, Boas found himself being pulled up a flexible, metallic, rolling ladder into a hatchway, which closed behind them so leniently that no seam was visible to the naked eye. Then he found himself in a small, square room. It had no furnishings, but was brightly lit. He said kind of the same light as broad daylight. Recessed square lights in smooth metallic walls. Suddenly an opening appeared from the seamless wall, and Boas was led into another room. There, the only furnishings that were visible was an oddly shaped table that stood at one side of the room, surrounded by several backless swivel chairs, something like bar stools. They were all made of the same white material. The table as well as the stools were one-legged, narrowing toward the floor, where they were either fixed, such as the table, to it, or linked to a movable ring held fast by 3 hinges jutting out of each side and riveted to the floor, such as the stools, so that the sitting on them could turn in every direction. His abductors then grabbed and held him in place while communicating in sounds that, again, had no resemblance whatever to human speech. I can think of no attempt to describe those sounds. So different were they from anything I've ever heard before. Those sounds still make me shiver when I think of them. It isn't even possible for me to reproduce them. My vocal organs are not made for it. Again, he compares the sounds to animal grunts, some longer, others shorter, sometimes containing several different sounds at the same time, at other times ending in a tremor. These creatures then began undressing him, despite his constant opposition to this.
Oh, I'm sure he fought real hard.
They obviously couldn't understand me, but they stopped and stared at me as if they were trying to make me understand that they were being polite. Besides, though they had to employ force, they never at any time hurt me badly, and they did not even tear my clothes, with the exception of my shirt, perhaps. Stripped naked, they then rubbed all over his body a clear, odorless liquid, and then he was prompted into another room with red inscriptions over the door. He said they were like scribbles of a kind entirely unknown to us.
So they rubbed him down with lube and sent him into a room with a big light saying, come fuck this dude. That's essentially what's happening right now, right?
Hot alien action this way is what the sign said.
Yeah.
Soon, 2 of the figures joined him, carrying apparatuses which they took some blood from his chin, leaving a small scars that were later noticed by the doctors at the hospital that caused him no pain and only minimal discomfort. But this is where the room gets good.
Oh, the movie The Room? You're my favorite customer.
So Antonio then says he was left alone for about an hour and made himself comfortable on a large, featureless foam rubber-like gray bed, or couch, in the middle of the room. It had no legs, he said.
Somebody took him to a swingers club. Jesus fucking Christ.
From holes in the wall, from about the height of his head, came... from glory holes about the size of his head, came this gray smoke that was piped in and quickly dissolved.
Cock smoke is what you say.
Oh, this place is full of it. Boas said at first he felt kind of nauseous from the smoke, and then he began feeling suffocated. He rushed to one corner of the room and vomited, and after that his breathing became a little easier. A little while later, a door opened, and in walked a naked alien woman. Some have thought that the liquid or even the smoke might have been some type of aphrodisiac. Or maybe that the smoke allowed the alien woman to breathe without her helmet. We really don't know. She came in slowly, unhurriedly, perhaps a little amused at the amazement she saw was written on my face. I stared, open-mouthed. She was beautiful, though of a different type of beauty compared with the women I have known. Her hair was blonde, nearly white, almost like dyed hair with peroxide. It was smooth, not very thick, with a part in the center, and she had big blue eyes, rather longer than round, for they slanted outward like those pencil-drawn girls made to look like Arabian princesses. They looked as if they were slit, except that they were natural. There was no makeup. Her nose was straight, not pointed, not turned up, nor too big. The contour of her face was different, though, because she had very high, prominent cheekbones. They made her face narrow to a peak, so that all of a sudden it ended with a pointed chin. Her lips were very thin, nearly invisible in fact. Her ears, which I only saw later, were small and did not seem different from ordinary ears. Her high cheekbones gave one impression that there was a broken bone somewhere underneath, but as I discovered later, they were soft and fleshy to the touch, so they did not seem to be made of bone. Her body was much more beautiful than any I had ever seen before. It was slim, and her breasts stood up high and well separated. Her waistline was thin, her belly flat, her hips well developed, perhaps even childbearing. And her thighs were large. Her feet were small.
Projecting a lot.
Her hands long and narrow. Her fingers and nails were normal. She was much shorter than I am. Her head only reached my shoulder. Her skin was white, that of a fair woman here, and she was full of freckles on her arms. I didn't notice any perfume, except for maybe a natural female odor. And another thing I noticed was her hair in her armpits was bright red, near the color of blood, as was her hair down there.
Okay. Well, you're in my wheelhouse now.
He says that the woman came toward him, in silence, looking at me all the while as if she wanted something from me. Pressing herself to him, he understood what her purpose was. I began to get excited.
Oh, boy.
I ended up forgetting everything and held the woman close to me, corresponding to her favors with greater ones of my own. That's right, they lay down on the couch bed thing and had sexual intercourse.
Yeah, you are squirming a lot, Jake. I'll just put that out.
They performed a variety of acts together for about an hour.
Wow! The stamina. It's Anna Taylor-Joy, by the way.
After the two had had their sexual encounter, she pulled away. All they wanted was a good stallion to improve their stock, he thought. He said he enjoyed the encounter, and even though the woman refused to kiss him, apparently instead of kissing, she would go to his chin and bite at it and nibble at it, while making sounds that in Bosch's mind sounded like animal growls.
Yeah, did he fuck a dog? He might have fucked a dog.
She never spoke. When they were finished, one of the creatures entered and called out to the woman.
Come here, girl! Come here, girl! Come here!
But before leaving, she looked back at him. She pointed to her belly and smilingly then pointed to the sky. Then she went away. I interpreted the sign as meaning to say that she intended to return and take me with her to wherever she lived. He seemed to be concerned, or even afraid, for as he took the meaning quite seriously and wasn't sure if he was anxious to leave the familiar surroundings of his family. Then after fetching the woman, the creature returned Boash's clothing. He was led back to a room with stools and table, where the crew sat and communicated with each other in their strange way, kind of just ignoring him. He felt altogether calm, for I knew no harm would come to me. Now he had a chance to take in his surroundings, and he tried to remember everything he could. He noticed that the walls were smooth, metal, and hard, and no windows anywhere. He noticed a box with a glass top that kind of like an alarm clock, and he tried to swipe it and conceal it. I guess it's kind of smart if you're on an alien ship to snag something and prove where you were.
Oh, hell yeah.
But he was found out, and one of the crew members seized it instantly and shoved him back.
If you're going to do this on a table, we have to be underneath watching.
The creatures continued to lead him through the ship, pointing out various interesting features, which Boas described at length with a remarkable amount of detail. Boas stressed that there was no doubt in his mind whatsoever that he was aboard a metal craft. The tour finally over, one of the figures gestured him down the ladder and pointed to itself to the ground, and then in a southerly direction in the sky, the same direction the woman had pointed. Boas was signaled to step back, The ladder retracted, and the ship rose. Tripod landing struts retracted once again so that once in place no sign of the opening was even visible, and stopped a little over 100 feet above his head. It got increasingly brighter. The buzz formed, the dislocation of air grew louder, and the revolving saucer began to rotate at a terrific speed, while the light turned to many shades of color, finally settling on a bright red. As this happened, the machine abruptly changed direction by turning unexpectedly and producing a large noise, a kind of shock. When this was over, the strange airship darted off suddenly like a bullet southward, holding itself slightly askew at such a heady speed that it disappeared from sight in a few seconds. It now is about 5:30 in the morning when Boas returned to his tractor. By his reckoning, 4.25 hours had elapsed. He discovered the tractor had been sabotaged. They were smart enough to know that he would try escaping, and that they had knowledge of how a tractor works. They had detached the battery wires. Boas did not leave this particular encounter unscathed. He had many various medical ailments that lingered with him for months afterwards. Boas seemed to be suffering from radiation poisoning with symptoms of body pains, nausea, headaches, loss of appetite, constant burning sensation in the eyes, cutaneous lesions at the slightest of light bruising which went on appearing for months that looked like small red bumps, harder than the skin around it and protuberant, painful when touched, each with a small central orifice with yellow discharge. The skin wounds showed a hyperchromatic, violent tinged area. Boas was also subjected to physical and psychological tests later on. He also experienced excessive sleepiness, a trait commonly found in subsequent abduction cases.
It sounds a lot like rendezvous. I mean, very similar medical ailments that come after that.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few stories out there of people having encounters with UFOs and or alien beings and having many things, especially radiation burns and poisoning.
How do you explain that? I mean, that part it's really hard to rationalize.
That is one of those elements, if it's to be believed. I mean, again, a lot of this that wasn't even looked at for months afterward. So, it could have been from something else.
Yeah, but radiation poison.
A lot of the accounts say the appearance, like the symptoms, are similar to that of radiation poisoning, but I don't think it was ever officially diagnosed by a physician. That is my understanding. So in 1957, a Brazilian writer named João Martins penned the first installment of a series titled Flying Saucers, Terrible Mission for the magazine O Cruzeiro. There he described cases of people at isolated places attacked by small alien beings, one being a case from 1954 of two Venezuelan teenagers who claimed to have stumbled upon a spaceship in the woods near their village. Small hairy aliens attacked them and injured one of the boys before they were able to beat the creatures back using an unloaded rifle as a club and escape to safety. This is one of the cases that he published. Martins also asked his readers to write him with their own experiences. Among hundreds of responses, he selected one of a young farmer from Minas Gerais with whom he exchanged several letters. That next year, Martins paid for the 23-year-old farmer to come to Rio de Janeiro, where he was examined by Dr. Olavo Fontes. That farmer, and his story was Antônio Vias Boas, and his story was the one that was published. Dr. Fontes sent a detailed report about Vias Boas' case to the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, but they decided it was too fantastic to publish. Nevertheless, the story circulated between experts for quite a while. Eventually, that story got out. Walter Buehler of the Brazilian ufology group SBEDV, SBEDV,
okay,
and a follower of the self-described alien contactee George Adamski learned about Vias Boas' story, and in 1962, Buehler visited the young farmer in his hometown. The group subsequently published a report on the Vias Boas case in English, and the account aligned with Adamski's earlier descriptions of aliens and their spaceship. In January 1965, an international journal called the Flying Saucer Review reproduced Buehler's report worldwide. Now, one of the things that led people to believe that it has to be true is that a lot of people had this fairly racist notion that a poor farmer with very little education, he couldn't possibly come up with this. It has to be true. One, that's pretty effing racist. Two, he did go on to become a lawyer, so it's not as though he was unschooled. And three, anybody can come up with a story, and anybody can have something happen to them. None of these are mutually exclusive concepts.
Absolutely.
After that incident, he had reported experiencing nightmares and been haunted by flashbacks of his experience, probably for most of his life. Despite becoming a lawyer, his mental state had deteriorated, and he exhibited mental symptoms such as anxiety, depression, and distress. Hey, join the club. He married and had 4 children. He stuck to his story for the rest of his life. He'd had a little bit of fame, but he didn't, write his own book or anything. This was long before going on television programs. He just stuck by his story until he passed away in 1991.
Kind of the anti-Woody Derenberger.
Yeah. And, I mean, again, does that lead anybody to believe his story is stronger than others? I don't know, but I think it's always a sign in the right direction when you're not trying to use it for fame and fortune.
Well, yeah, I mean, Betty and Barney Hill didn't want fame and fortune. In fact, their lives were ruined by the whole scenario.
Yeah. So there's a lot of elements of the story where it's kind of like, did he get this? One, assumed that he read that story of the Venezuelan boys and some other stories from the magazine that then he wrote in about his own story. So maybe he took some flights of fancy and made it up. There's also the weird landing legs elements, things like that. But there were no abduction cases in popular culture before this point. This is the first major case of alien abduction, and it had that sexual element, that hybridization element way back.
Which we have touched on.
Yeah, these are all things that have become now ubiquitous within alien abduction stories after that. Again, there's a lot of eccentricities to the story, lots of differences, but there are a lot of core elements. So, you can't make a claim one or the other, but it is interesting. That's why I pointed out.
Absolutely.
He wasn't necessarily drawing off of anything that had come before. He hadn't seen an X-Files episode.
Yeah.
This was new.
Yet. There was no Betty and Barney Hill yet.
That was not for years later.
Brazil is a hotbed for that kind of activity. It is really curious.
We had talked about, a lot of these elements come from, there's a certain domino effect, one might say. And this is at least a case where there doesn't seem to be any dominoes. He would have been making this stuff up almost whole cloth.
Which doesn't really make a lot of sense.
Maybe, but...
No, it doesn't make a lot of sense that he would just come up with all of these tropes that would come up later just out of whole cloth. I'm not discrediting him.
A lot of people know about Betty Barney Hill or Travis Walton, or those type of things.
Absolutely.
But not a lot of people know about Vias Boas and the fact that his case happened so much earlier than those. But, it took a long time to get out and spread and just never got the type of acclaim that those did. But it is kind of a progenitor of a lot of and really a bellwether for what would become standard fare. There's a lot of stuff in there you don't get. You don't get little tubes from their helmets, whatnot. The weird red light things on their chests. Having saucy sex with the platinum-haired fire crotch.
Not enough, at least.
Not enough. I could try and find more saucy aliens.
We can find some. It's probably not real, but we can find it. That is absolutely fascinating. Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that one up. That is a really, really interesting case study.
Yeah, so that is that.
I think that fits exactly into what we're trying to talk about when it comes to UFO phenomenon, alien abduction, encounters.
That was a good show.
The TV show. I was going to say, yes. The TV show.
Oh, that's so fucked up,
Literally
man.
was about to say that.
It was a good show, though.
I shouldn't have paused. Which is exactly where we are. UFO encounter experiences. I think sometimes we can be... I'm not actually dismissive. It's more that if we want to talk about things like this, I would rather be able to definitively discount the criticism if we're going to run with it. You know what I mean? I would rather come from the skeptical side that says, well, we have eliminated the obvious terrestrial explanations for it because otherwise our credibility just as believers or even just skeptics suffers. So no, I'm not pessimistic. I am not cynical about it. I would rather just eliminate the possibilities that can be explained. And when we get to where we cannot explain them, now we can actually talk about them in a way that we can speculate and evaluate these things on their surface. So
I wanted one that had a sexy angle to it,
Hell yeah. Yeah, that wasn't gross like that Harvest one.
Yeah. You know, I mean, he didn't ask to get taken to a ship by a bunch of aliens who were probably watching through the peepholes as he banged Lee, but he seemed to enjoy himself.
Well, sure,
And,
yeah. It wasn't a bunch of assy McGee's impregnating women. I mean, better.
Oh, assy McGee's.
That's kind of what that was.
That was a messed up story.
Lord knows what happened to her. Whether her accounts are completely accurate or not, I hope she finds solace somehow.
Yeah. And even though he had some sexy times, Vias Boas, like I said, he had issues that stemmed for months and years.
Sure.
Both physical and psychological. So, F off, aliens. How about that?
Yeah.
Cut it out.
It's like a dog that jumps up on your lap constantly. Like, get the fuck, just get down. Just sit down. Tim Allen, get out of here. Get the fuck out of my crotch. Why aren't you in prison? Oh, you're a narc. I get it.
Well, we'll be back with some interesting, wild, perhaps zany, probably a little less of that, a little more,
We might do some zany ones, but hopefully not.
UFO cases that make you say, man, funk that. Why is it every time I get abducted by aliens?
See, aliens be like... No, we're not going to do that.
Aliens, they're short men.
Well...
I'm just saying.
They're either that or extremely tall.
Anyway, we hope you've enjoyed, maybe learned something. If you like what you've heard, please share, subscribe, and like on wherever you like things on the intertubes. If you wouldn't mind giving us 5 sexy alien ladies on the podcast app of your choice, we would greatly appreciate it. Ideally, Apple Podcasts. That's the best way for us to be seen and heard. And again, thank you. Just thank you for listening. It's always a pleasure to do this for you guys, and we hope that you've enjoyed yourself. So until we fly up into the sky, Skip, what should they do?
Like R. Kelly.
Piss down from on high.
As we urinate on our fan page.
That's my favorite ELO album.
That is one of the better ones. Our fans, or at least just listeners, should tip your wait staff. You tip your bartenders, your KJs, and what have yous. Make sure you've cleaned up after yourself to some sort of reasonable degree. And don't forget to support your local comic shops and retailers. And from Dispatch Ajax, Jack and I would both like to say, Godspeed, fair wizards, and don't get abducted.
Don't get abducted.
Please, go away.